So, welcome everybody. Thank you very much for joining us on our Identity in Focus series of podcasts. So, we're recording 4 podcasts, which are all sector focused. Today, we are going to be talking about something which means a hell of a lot to me, which is the public sector. My name's Richard Page. I've been working in the public sector on digital transformation projects for around about 25 years. I've worked across central government, local government, healthcare, and a little bit within the NHS as well. And I'm really interested in talking about public sector today, and specifically identity, primarily for 2 reasons. So the public sector, they are custodians of a really important asset, and that is citizen data. And we need to do everything that we can do to make sure that we protect that. Equally, if you're working within the public sector, you are also responsible for delivering critical services that we rely on every single day. So any impact to 2 of those issues causes us downstream problems. So we've got loads of stuff that we're going to unpack today. I'm delighted to say that I'm not going to be doing the unpacking. I'm asking the questions. I have got a grade A, gold standard, the best of the best, hand-picked panel to talk to you today, who come across a range of expertise, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves now. So, Richard.
Hello, I'm Richard Edwin. I'm Architecture Practice Lead here at FSP. I've got a background of 20 years in digital transformation and projects within central government, most recently public-facing digital services.
Hi, I'm Tom Hebbron, partner here at FSP, and I lead our digital identity practice. I've spent most of my career working in the identity and access management for workforces, but I'm really fascinated by some of the developments that we've seen in citizen and customer identity management and that cross-pollination that we see between those areas.
Hiya, I'm Fay Hawkins. I'm one of the group directors here at FSP, and I've worked with lots of different clients over my time, typically within the public sector, ranging from defence through to arm's length bodies and central government. And I've got a lot of battle scars from delivering digital transformation programmes. So I'm really interested to talk about this topic this afternoon.
So, fantastic range of experience in the room, a lot that we've got to canter through. I'm going to start, if it's okay with you, Tom, talking about national strategy. So when it comes to citizen data, if you look at how it works across the world, you've got various different approaches to it. What are we doing in the UK?
So zooming right out for a minute, I think contrasting sort of 3 very different approaches we're seeing globally, and people tend to fall in one of these camps. So, everybody is familiar with, login with Google, login with Apple, right? So the American tech giants, you have an account with them, whether it's Microsoft, Google, Apple, and Amazon as well. And actually being able to log in with that existing account is quite low friction, right? So if you're building a website, you're building an online shop, allowing people to log in and quickly buy what's in their basket with an account they already have reduces friction, makes it more likely that that purchase goes through. Great. And then in China, we have the everything linked to your legal identity. The government runs everything. And that's a very different piece, so it's all government run, but of course, there's a privacy angle there. The government sees everything that you do, everything's linked to your legal identity, anonymity on the internet is being massively reduced. In the EU, especially since we had sort of GDPR pushing 6 years ago now, we have a much more sort of privacy-focused stance, which is looking much more at the citizen and preserving privacy and not, enforcing that one either tech mega giant has visibility of everything that you do online, and also making sure that it's kept within sort of EU borders. So those are 3 sort of very different ways of tackling the problem. And the UK obviously signed GDPR into law, so we're kind of aligned to the EU way. Equally, lots of people across the globe are all using those American tech mega giant logins. So we do need to give people another option, which doesn't send all of their data over to the States.
Yeah, absolutely. So as a citizen, we're kind of using the American approach, but we're also predominantly, when we're dealing with government, we're dealing with the European approach, which feels like we're sitting on the fence, which feels about right. Yeah. So Richard, and apologies, Richard, if I call you Red, we've worked together for a long time, and that's generally what you know does. But Richard, you lead a team of enterprise architects, focusing a lot on central government projects. Obviously, we've got national initiatives which are going down really well, which is gov.uk one login, which I said correctly, which is a mouthful. What does that service mean for a citizen? And describe it for those people within the public sector that aren't using it yet, because the chances are they might be in the future.
Yeah, so it's worth just considering kind of what came before one login and why it exists. So within public sector, in central government in the UK, we've had various initiatives over the year. People may be familiar with Government Gateway. They may have heard of Verify previously. Those are previous incarnations of trying to provide citizens within the UK a single coordinated means of interacting with UK online services. And as we know, technology and use of digital services has evolved massively over the years. The adoption has increased, and quite rightly so, the UK government has kind of evolved to keep up with that as well, delivering new services and learning from those experiences as well. So gov.uk one login, which was launched initially around 2021 and has evolved through different kind of scaling out over that time. It's currently at about 50 government services are on it, and I think with this year the target is to grow that to 100 services on it. It's there as a central means of a single means, I should say, of citizens accessing government services. So having to provide one set of login credentials and then having access to the services that they choose and they want to access and use. So that's it in its simplest sense. Why is that beneficial? It avoids individuals having to remember multiple authentication details, passwords, methods of accessing those services. So it's a much more kind of usable sort of service. It attracts the latest in kind of accessibility techniques, so that minimizes any alienation for people accessing with kind of digital accessibility needs. Gives a standard way, a familiar way, a trusted way of accessing those services. It also importantly gives the citizen control over what they're doing. And this is a key tenet of the UK's approach to things. It's a decentralised approach to identity and digital identity and interaction with government. So the government in the UK isn't doing the identity checks against an individual as to whether they have the right to access a service or not. That's federated out to a group of trusted and certified suppliers. So it allows the individual to feel that it's not a big brother view overlooking them and seeing what's being done. A previous national identity database about 10 years ago was
it's not very British, is it?
Yeah, it was a proof of concept that didn't really adopt because of privacy rights and things like that. Those were the concerns in this country. So one login provides that ability for individuals, increasingly so, to have one route into all of those services. Be that, at the moment, at the moment, there are a variety of services that aren't on one login. So HMRC, NHS, they're on either their own approaches and methods, or Government Gateway is still in use out there for some of these services. But the intent is to bring them all together into a single approach for the citizen.
Excellent. So I can attest, and I would happily be a case study. So I was working, when I was doing a little bit of prep for this session, I was working, as your mother often does, needing some help to do something online. And she was very anti using any government service because I think she'd had issues. It was either with Government Gateway or something like that. But over the weekend, I took her through gov.uk one login. Very easy to use, really, really simple. So, if the government are looking for a reference or a case study, then Mrs. Page is happy to oblige. She's committed to that. Fay, you're seeing this use a lot across government. What are some exemplars that you're seeing? You also did a bit of testing earlier today to sort of see what you could do, and there were some interesting things that you found. Yeah,
I did find some really interesting services. I'm not quite sure the priority order of why those ones went on to went on before any others, but of course there's a lot of digital civilian services, should we say, that now are accessible via. Now I'm going to try and say it, gov.uk one login.
Yeah, it needs a rebrand, doesn't it?
Yeah,
it's a mouthful.
Or just slow right down. So DBS, so defence and, not defence, sorry. What's he called again?
Disclosure and barring service.
Can't remember that. Disclosure and barring services, that you can now do your basic DBS checks via the online digital services using gov.uk one login. Of course, you can also log in to the land registry and you can sign your mortgage deeds all with the same login. And you can also apply on the DVLA, you can apply for your vehicle operator license. So there's a whole range of services. You can also apply for your fishing license in Wales if you really want to. Lots of services, and I'm sure a lot more are going to be coming on. So one of the biggest services that will be coming through will be the our favourite time of year is the tax returns. That we're moving away from the government gateway services and be using gov.uk one login. So it's been amazing to see how many government departments are starting to move their digital services into the centralised identity solution. And actually what it does for the end user is incredible. So I don't know about you, but if I've forgotten a login or I can't quite remember my password, something will sit on my to-do list for a pretty long time.
Yeah.
So
until the deadline looms.
The deadline looms, or I'm about to go on holiday and I haven't reported my passport as being lost, or I kind of put it off for as long as possible. But actually, removing the friction of having multiple logons for civilians is actually enabling them to engage with the government services in a much better way.
Yeah.
So not only does it mean that people are more likely to do things in real time. So if I've lost my passport, I'm not going to leave it until April before I'm just about to go on holiday. I'm probably going to report it right there and then because it's easy for me to do it. And I think as well, from a security perspective, you're no longer writing down your passwords.
Yeah.
If you know how you're going to be accessing government services, and some of the data that they're holding is very sensitive. So you do want to make sure that nobody is getting hold of your passwords and getting into your data. So that's from an end user perspective, but also internally it does enable the digital teams within government organisations to actually streamline their own identity services and remove some of the maintenance they have from running multiple services. So I think even from an efficiency perspective, from a maintenance perspective, and also their processes, only having one process to manage identity will be a huge step forward. I mean, I work with some clients and they have 5 or 6 identity management solutions all plugged into each other, and to be honest, I don't know how they manage them, but this does simplify things a lot more.
Perfect. So if you are a lorry driver who lives in Wales and goes fishing at the weekend and is considering doing teacher training, plus you've lost your passport, you can just do all of that now with a single ID.
log on.
Yeah, just
all in
as
one
easy
place.
as that.
Yeah.
So if you're out there and that's you, then this has been a good news podcast for you. So it does feel that Britain has got things kind of right here. So there's the momentum that's going. When we do the edit, if we want to have the national anthem in the background here, that would be great as well. It's definitely a good news story. What are the government doing to help push this out further? Red, what are your views on this? What do you know?
Yeah. So there are challenges in rolling it out because there's the barriers of legacy systems integrating with those to a new service. There's been investment made in those. So the kind of motivators to move are hard to see sometimes there for departments. Plus, there's a bit of technical knowledge and know-how needed to do so, and that costs money, costs time to achieve that. But in the last few weeks, there's been communication out to secretaries of state on different departments, actually saying that all public-facing services need to be on gov.uk one login by the end of 2027.
Right, that's a big step change.
It is, yeah, and a sort of central message and encouragement to do so. But also importantly as well is the number of digital services that issue some sort of credential, so be that a driver's license, a passport, a certificate of some form. They want to know what are the department's plans for issuing those by the end of summer 2025, so that those can be candidates to go on to the government digital wallet, which is another element of the identity strategy within UK government.
Fantastic. Hold that thought. We'll be coming back to that in a second. So, Tom, if you stick your identity practice lead hat on, what advice can you give to a security leader in a public sector organisation when they're thinking about that planning piece? What are the things that they've got to be doing now to go and make sure that they're loading their dice in their favour to deliver a successful project?
I mean, when we think about the sort of nuts and bolts and the plumbing, what's been provided for Gov UK One login, there's some great assets out there. The documentation's really good. There's test systems. Integrating that into your platform as you're building it is about as easy as it could be. Underlying technology is the same as the Apple and the Google and so on logins, so it's probably something your developers are already familiar with if you're going to offer those other logins as well. And obviously, as we get people signing up to use all of the different public services that are using it, odds are they have an account already, so it's very low friction. So you should definitely be, if you haven't already had a communication from government saying you must use this, it's beneficial. It's good for your users too. I think also where we've got organisations where they have got like 5, 6, 7 different identity systems, it's a chance to kind of throw them away, reduce the management, and just have one simple system that you maintain. And also you've got this huge community across the UK developing it, building it, and integrating with other new things that are coming in, like the digital wallets. I think also from with the broader identity technologist hat on, authentication and authorization, the two main bits of identity management, are going the same way as cryptography. Don't roll your own.
Absolutely.
Use a good one that someone has built and is well tested. And certainly, the days of having a database table with usernames and passwords in there, which then get cracked and stolen, are long gone. Don't do it.
So you don't do that, right? Okay, right.
Spreadsheet
note. So digital wallets. Talk to me about that, Richard.
Yeah, so the UK government announced in February of this year, as part of their digital blueprint that was issued, a new kind of relaunch of the government digital service, setting forward their future view and strategy for government digital services, kind of reinvigorating that. As part of that was the announcement that digital wallets are going to become a real thing going forward with government. And we're all very familiar with these days with the concept of wallets. On our mobile phones, we've maybe added our bank card to a wallet so we can just tap and pay with a mobile phone, or maybe download travel tickets into our wallet so we've got somewhere secure and encrypted on our phone to store those that credential, that information that's personal to us, and we don't want other people using and getting access to, but we want to choose when we use that, when we pay with our card, when we use that travel ticket. It's exactly the same concept as that, except the UK government's producing an official wallet for government credentials that resides on your phone. So that's so when you're issued a digital driving license, or issued a passport, or issued a permit for fishing in Wales. I'm going to continue on that theme on this one.
It's essential.
You can store it.
You just take your phone and your rod. Off you go.
You can store that information in your government wallet, and you then decide what elements of that information you share and when. So if you need to access a new government's digital service, and that requires you to share potentially your date of birth, your age. It's only eligible for people over a certain age. You might well choose from your passport information, which has been verified and certified and stored in there, to share your date of birth. Because from your date of birth, your age can be calculated.
Of course, yeah.
So you don't need to share the whole piece of information.
What you want to show.
So it's all part of empowering the individual and giving them the ownership and the responsibility to control what data they share with whom and when, and potentially revoke that as well. Is a potential option there within the wallet as well. So you've shared it with someone, a government department, but then maybe there's no need for that to be used anymore. So there's going to be kind of controls around that will evolve over time as well.
Fantastic. So I've got teenage kids, and I'm always amazed how the fact that they can go to college and literally just take a phone and maybe a charger. Now they can do pretty much everything. They've got verifiable credentials as to who they are, how old they are. They can do everything that they need to. They've got their bank card stored in their digital wallet. I mean, it's just, it feels like it's the future. And as long as that people have got confidence in that verifiable component, then it feels like a solution that's going to stay.
Yeah, there's a trust thing there. The government is obviously establishing trust for citizens to use that, but also, part of that is by saying, as the government, we are going to enable you to use this, but we're not bringing all this information into one place ourselves. It's you as an individual who decides what you're going to use this for and how.
Yeah, excellent. So if we take a little bit of a shift, so we've talked about the sort of the citizen view of things. It feels like we're doing really good things at a national level. Great service with gov.uk one login. But if you're a public sector organisation and you're putting all of your effort in there and not focusing on your employees, then it's kind of pointless having a fantastic citizen-facing service. So I was sat down with a CISO within a critical national infrastructure organisation last week, and they were talking about identity as the new perimeter. Tom, what are your views on this? Do you feel like we've now had this step change where CISOs are seeing identity as something which is, a fundamental pillar of cybersecurity resilience?
Yeah, it's definitely, raced up the agenda, hasn't it? Which is, I think a really lucky area of cyber to sort of fall into. But yeah, I mean, as we've seen, especially since the sort of change to more remote working during COVID, which is, I can't believe it's kind of 5 years ago. And even before that, the race to the cloud and, the whole IT in the enterprise, that whole estate now is not in a data center. You're not physically in a building plugged into a port in the wall. The modern IT services that as an employee I work with every day is a complete patchwork quilt of cloud services that we host, and they're all over the place. The one thing that unites it all is my identity, that I'm given access to the tools that I need to do my job, and they're all over the shop. That also means that as an employer, you've got a huge responsibility to make sure that, first of all, people get that access fast so they can do their job, that it adapts as they move around the business. And if, for those jobs where you are there for 5, 10, 20 years, that means that you don't accumulate it. And by the time you finish, you basically have access to everything in the organisation. It's not good. And that when you do leave or retire, that access is taken away quickly and you don't retain access to things that you shouldn't have as a non-employee.
Yeah, I think privilege creep is something that we've all seen extensively. But if you're a security leader within the public sector and you're not doing anything at the moment, what are the leading indicators that we're seeing which highlight that you've potentially got a problem? What advice can we give to people in this area?
I mean, some of the red flags are the ones that will be coming up on your audits already, right? As I just mentioned, it's the levers access that isn't removed, So I think that there have been huge pushes over the last 10, 15 years to get everyone on single sign-on, and that's great because it's a great user experience and it's easier to administer. But most organisations still have loads of systems that aren't integrated. And it's really hard to find them. There's the whole shadow IT piece, where somebody goes and buys with a credit card. Only 5 people in the marketing department use it, but actually somebody leaves and they've still got access to all that data and so on. I think going back to sort of digital wallets, one of the most exciting things about digital wallets, not for the citizen but for employers and employees, is we use a lot more contractors, right? People aren't in jobs for life anymore. Onboarding and offboarding contractors who might come in for a few weeks to do a piece of work. That whole verification and with deepfakes, and there you go, we've jumped into AI. But knowing who somebody is and validating it, especially if there's somebody that comes back and works for the organisation more than once, being able to do that really quickly with in your digital wallet with your verified identity. As an employer, I can sign certain attributes that says, okay, I've checked who you are. It checks out with the passport office. I've seen that the government signed your digital wallet, your passport. I can now give you some signed attributes, which means you can get into my systems for 3 months and then it's revoked. And it just means that whole onboarding process can be incredibly more efficient.
That sounds fantastic. Yes.
Well, gone will be the days queuing at the pass office, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
It's an efficiency for both the employer or department in public sector, but also for the individual as well. It gives a much more, prove your identity once in a trusted way rather than having to repeatedly go and do so. Physical evidence of that as well, it reduces having to go and travel in there to locations to prove it physically, which is a nightmare. Yes,
I think so. So I want to just talk about something which I don't know whether you've ever heard this term before. It's called zero trust. So zero trust, I think, is something which is on every single email in my personal and professional inboxes since probably about 2021. And it got to the point where, I kind of turned off about what it is. Now, obviously, we all know what zero trust is, but for those who are out there who've been living in a cave who haven't got a clue, let's educate them on what zero trust is and what the implications are specifically when it comes to identity.
Yeah, so the National Cyber Security Centre, NCSC, the government body that advises on security guidelines and approaches, it promotes zero trust as an approach for certainly kind of modern enterprise as to how you manage your identity and access and permissions within your organization. And what it does is offers an alternative to a more traditional means of securing your estate. So perhaps the easiest way to explain it is to consider an office building, and under the traditional model, you turn up in the morning, there's a CCTV camera looking at the outside, just monitoring who's coming in. You go in, you scan your pass at the desk once you're in there, and then you're pretty much free to roam within the office. You can go to any room within the building, you can use any printer or any system. You're trusted to go wherever you need to. But of course, that's quite simple at the perimeter, the security is imposed. But there's no subsequent sort of monitoring of what's going on, or should you actually be able to get access to those rooms or those other places. So zero trust imposes a completely different view in that you still rock up there, there's still some CCTV monitoring access on the outside, there's still a desk where you have to scan your card and kind of be authenticated for that initial access. But then a breach is assumed is the kind of the title that they use within zero trust. The network is hostile, as they call about it. They name it. So whenever you're in there, you're not trusted to have access to any room there unless your pass and your permissions align with the policy that allows you into that room or access to that system. So, but by default, zero access is assumed, and only if you've been granted that are you allowed into that space. So that not only does that provide a more granular and controlled access control to all those different rooms and areas within that building, it also creates a kind of audit trail of access as well. So behaviours can be monitored there. The kind of CCTV is in every room. So if someone's trying the door handle repeatedly somewhere or swiping their card, that can be detected. So within an IT estate, that's a building analogy to it, but within the IT estate, it's very similar in that as an individual, when I log in, I'm granted some token that carries my permissions and rights of access. And every time I interact with another system, I have to provide that, or my system automatically provides that and checks it against policies to say, are you allowed access into this environment, into this system? Likewise, my device, my laptop or my mobile phone under zero trust is registered within that ecosystem, so that the organization responsible for that ecosystem knows that I've got all the right updates on there. I'm a recognized device. I've not just brought some laptop from home along and plugged it in and hope to access things. So it's a much more controlled and secure way of dealing with things, but it's also more complicated as well. There's more moving parts to think about. But it's ideal for the more hybrid ways of working, where we've got a more dynamic workforce and workplace, and more threats perhaps within those environments. So it's more suited to that modern way of working, but there's a lot more to kind of unpack and apply to ensure you're doing it effectively.
Yeah, it sounds like it, and I think this is probably where we need advice from you, Fay. So, to me, it sounds theoretically like this is something which is entirely sensible. From a practical implementation and organisation point of view within the public sector, how do we unpack that? I mean, that's a lot of stuff that's needed.
Yeah, with great difficulty, I would say. So I think the key thing is, if you're standing still from an identity perspective, you've already gone backwards, because it shouldn't be something that you implement a project and you make changes to your identity solution and then you leave it there. It should be a continuous maturity of not only the technology you're using, but also the processes and the end user training that is needed at all times. So it should never stand still. So if you haven't got into that place already, then my strong recommendation would be to really put some effort and investment into making sure that you are maturing whatever your approach is today with identity. Now, of course, there will be times where a bigger transformation would be needed. And to be honest, I think these things would apply to any transformation, not just identity. So any digital transformation. And the things I think that really need to be considered are nothing to do with identity or tech. So there's so many times I've worked on programs where halfway through the program, everyone's kind of lost sight of why they were doing it in the first place. And then leadership are questioning things and it all becomes a little bit confused. And especially in the public sector, because you do have movement of people around different organisations and departments. So it probably happens more often in the public sector. Yeah. And actually having that really strong anchor as to why you're doing anything in the first place really does help move forward. And it's a lot easier said than done, to be completely honest. And, you know, from a process perspective, you'd say, well, all tie back to the business case in theory, but again, it's not always that simple. And then I guess at a lower level to that, actually understanding the business requirements you're trying to achieve. So there's been quite a few occasions where I've been working on a transformation program and there's a project to change the identity management solution. And you ask, why are you doing that? Oh, because the application we want to bring in needs that one, works better with that one. And it's completely underestimated the level of complexity that actually doing that will bring to not only the IT estate, but also HR having to manage joiners, movers, leavers, security trying to manage what does that mean to access to everywhere else, even how you manage your information and what kind of level of security. So it's incredibly complex, and sometimes I think it's massively underestimated, and we use it to try and answer a question that might not actually need answering. So I guess there's the why, the what's the actual business problem you're trying to fix from a requirements perspective. But then the other giant part of all transformations is the people side. Now, every single transformation program I've worked on massively underestimates the amount of investment that's needed on things like business change, leadership coaching, communication, training. It's kind of like the afterthought, you know, the build it and they will come type vibe. Never works, ever. Categorically never works. So I think, and then a lot of time it's because transformations are driven from an IT or a digital department. So that's where their focus is. But I would say you almost need more investment on the people side than you do on the technology side, because the technology, by and large, will be what it is. The people piece is a massive variable, which, and sometimes you're fighting right up against really ingrained cultures that haven't changed in years, and you're actually asking people to behave in a completely different way. Well, your technology is not going to tell you that. Yeah. It's going to be through quite a lot of focus on how do you actually change the way people work. So I would say those are the key three things. Yeah.
Tom?
I mean, I think, 2 points. One is, you know, whenever we do the big identity transformation pieces, we never start with the technology. Yeah. Often there is a piece of legacy technology they want rid of.
It's interesting that most people, that's where they would want to start, because that's exciting.
We've often come in where they've already bought the technology and now we have to, shoehorn that in. We've bought the licenses, now that has to be the answer. What's the question? But yeah, you know, a good identity transformation starts with actually, you know, what's the vision? Where are we trying to get to? Then we can build a roadmap, and then we can start looking at technology, because most, you know, the technology is never perfect, right? It never does exactly what you want. You always have to wrap process around it to get it to where you want to. But, you know, that vision tends to not be about, yes, we've got that technology or that vendor in. I mean, maybe we've consolidated vendors, but it's about what can people do? Because that's the vision, isn't it? It's, you know, 5 years in the future, we've got this technology in, and the people can now do this, and it's easier. And, you know, and easier is the important point, isn't it? You know, I'm sure people were listening to Red sort of describing the zero trust version of the building and thinking, well, that sounds awful. You know, I go in and I get stopped at every door and, you know, everything's just painful. Making that security and user friendly, so it all just happens in the walls and you don't see it. That's the trick.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been sat in meetings where actually I think they've done a half decent job of talking about the requirements of their employees, and that's all great. And then somebody will say, oh, what about our supply chain? And somebody will go, yeah, we'll cover that as well. And literally that's it. We'll deal with the whole of the supply chain just like that. And it's clear that they've not considered the sort of the broader picture as to what identity actually covers.
Yeah.
Anything on supply chain? Because it's one of those things which I know it's a difficult problem to solve.
So listen to the other one about retail, because we talk a lot about supply chain there and the challenges, because I think in the world of retail and that huge supply chain, that's obviously a big challenge. But, any large organisation doesn't work in isolation.
No. And actually managing identity across multiple organisations so that the right people have access to the right information is even more complex, because you can't manage that internally to your organisation.
Yeah.
So you have dependencies across the whole supply chain to get that right. And sometimes if you do make a simple assumption and you remove someone's access to information, or you just don't give it to them, it can stop things happening. It stops people doing their jobs. It stops deliveries arriving. It stops people going on sites. There's a lot of repercussions to getting it wrong from an operational perspective. So, supply chain shouldn't be under-considered.
It's a role as well where standards has an increasingly important part to play. So identity standards, evolve fairly slowly over time, but they have evolved over time. So, you mentioned OIDC or OAuth, I think earlier, common standards that are used to support that interoperability between suppliers, or to allow you to move from one supplier to another with minimal impact. And within the public sector, they've introduced, the government's operating a national identity and attribute framework that defines how some of these interactions need to work between the landscape of suppliers as well there, so that the government isn't beholden just to one single supplier or way of doing things. Is actually an ecosystem of trusted, certified suppliers who different departments or different services can procure the most effective solution from as well. And there'll be other standards as well that help ensure that the security levels are at the same level.
Yeah, there's lots and lots of new developments around, as we were talking, going back to the walking around the building, your behaviour and what you're doing is really important context to make access decisions. But if the different systems that have to look at your context that you carry with you, what have you been up to for the last 20 minutes? Have you taken your watch off? Is it still you? You take your watch off, you have to put your pin in again, right? Yeah. Because your heartbeat stopped and it's you're no longer authenticated to the watch, so you can't make payments with it. So that sort of continuous stream, but that data about who you are, what you've been doing, has to be built in, shared languages that can be passed between systems so they can benefit from it.
So we touched on a bunch of things, and obviously we're in a regulated sector within government. We've got so many regulations that we find that people are considering. Obviously we've got the NCSC CAF, which is probably the one that most people are familiar with, but we come across ISO 27001, GDPR, you name them, there is some level of involvement. I suppose one of the general consensuses that I hear from people is that identity and regulation, it's just a burden. However, we've had conversations, Tom, around turning that around and actually it just being a competitive advantage. So can you talk to me a little bit more about what we mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, so some of the examples we've already given around, just making the JML thing work better, right? So you're not paying for contractors sitting around doing nothing for 2 or 3 days while they wait for their access.
That's the answer to a lot of our prayers.
And also reducing risk. Obviously, that ultimately hits the bottom line. But some of the other competitive advantages, when you're talking about that sort of regulatory burden, actually, if you're scrambling for weeks with an army of people once or twice a year to go and check who has access to what, that should be a continuous process. You shouldn't have to scramble and do it. It should be something that you can evidence all the time, because you're using that data to make access decisions every day, not something you scramble together for an audit report twice a year.
Yeah, so it's this whole compliance theatre which we come across quite frequently.
Yeah, and I think, when you're doing that scramble once or twice a year to sort of pull the data together and go who's got access to what, I think there's a huge risk that we do see often in sort of, poorly implemented IAM systems where, that access that everyone in your team's got and you have to sign off that they still need it, is so poorly described that actually you don't risk impacting them being able to do their work by saying, actually, I don't think they need that anymore. You've no idea what it is. So you end up with, compliance theatre or security theatre where we tick it. We tick the box, yes, we've done the audit, but really,
Day two, you're
there's
back to your
probably a lot of
normal
access you don't
behaviours.
need.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just need to stop now and just congratulate all three of you. We've got this far and nobody has mentioned the word. And you know the word that I mean. We're talking AI here. But when it comes to identity, we joke of AI ID, which, is a thing, is not a thing. We can debate that. But when we're looking at AI and how that's impacting identity, what do you see as the future, Ed? Where is it going?
Yeah, so I think in public sector, in government, it's no different to other sectors in that AI represents both a threat and an opportunity. So, in the opportunity sense, there's the ability to use AI to improve fraud prevention and look for patterns that
fraud.
Yes,
if that's your game.
So there's an opportunity there from the central government perspective, an opportunity to enhance the security and enhance the privacy around identity and ensuring services are secure. AI offers those sorts of abilities. So largely in terms of monitoring and assessing behaviours, gaining insight on either an individual or a collective basis, can be anonymised to understand that as well, so that there's no privacy constraints. But that offers better methods of detecting bad users, bad actors within the environment. But likewise, of course, government is worried about
it's a threat vector
fraud.
in itself.
Deepfakes. False profiles generated by AI and operating in a way that, to all intents and purposes, look like a real legitimate recipient of those, services or benefits that the government service is handing out. So, the mitigations there, through AI also, it's that balance all the time of using it in both a support factor, but also, it can be used to take advantage of services as well.
Yeah. So if you're looking at doing anything in AI, having an understanding of cybersecurity and also particularly the identity angle is probably something which is pretty essential.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. You think about how it's used in identity as well. Increasingly, biometrics is an option there as well. It's another factor that's very hard to copy. It's not impossible with modern techniques, but it's much harder with AI and the ability to process, face scans, fingerprint scans, to incorporate that within some of the services, especially within government. Increasingly, the roadmap for gov.uk One Login will be looking at those sorts of measures so that they can increase the certainty around someone's identity and therefore provide services that are perhaps of greater value but need that additional assurance because of the value of them there that AI can offer and enhance the level of protection around identity there. So it's lots of opportunities, but
lots of challenges as well. So we've really got two sides of the coin there. So we talk a lot within FSP about Identity 2.0, and what the next generation of tech stack might look like. Tommy, obviously it changes all of the time, but where do you see the trends going? Obviously, we've talked about AI, but if you're looking at the functional blocks and the types of solutions that people need to consider once they've done the requirements and, Fay's helped advise them on everything that they need to make it successful, what can you tell people?
I think it's more and faster. That's probably the in a nutshell version, isn't it? There's more data, there's more events, so adopting a zero trust philosophy means that we have to track a lot more what's happening with AI, and whether that's workloads, bots, an agent doing things on your behalf. There are going to be more identities in the system. Already, and I've forgotten the stats, there are more non-human identities in most computer systems than human identities, and they're a huge problem because they have quite often a lot of privilege and they operate under the radar. The joiner, mover, leaver doesn't apply to them, and attackers go after them because they're the things that have the access between the web server and the database and can go and pull everything out the database and exfiltrate it. So non-human identities, again, huge problem area, actually getting quite a lot of attention at the moment in the identity world. Yeah, and of course, the AI and the bots, right? First thing that we've done when we've worked with organisations in the public sector when they want to adopt things like Copilot is that Copilot gets the access that you have. So the things that it can surface and potentially include in documents you're having some assistance writing might be things you should never have had access to in the first place because your data governance across that organisation wasn't quite where it should be. We used to joke sort of 2 years ago about if you ever went into Delve in Office to see, what's going on, what other people are editing, there's probably a lot of stuff in there that you shouldn't really have ever had access to, but it was never properly looked after.
Yeah, absolutely. So public sector projects, Fay, there's lots of headlines about things that have not gone entirely to plan. The success rate, worldwide of identity projects historically in the sort of the 1.0 world was less than 50%. It's definitely improving, but is there any other considerations that a public sector security leader needs to be making to go and sort of load the dice in their favour to make sure it's going to be successful?
Yeah, I'd say one of the key recommendations would be actually to really focus on some discovery before starting. More often than not, the project starts with this is a really good idea to do this, and the project then starts
yeah.
and change starts to happen. But actually, I think that initial investment in discovery, maybe doing a data audit of what privileges different users have, all of those things up front, as well as looking at the overarching identity landscape and where the dependencies are, all of that work up front is critical, I think, to understand the complexity to then be able to decide what your project would do. I think complexity is hugely underestimated.
Yes.
And so is the complexity of the data, not just the systems, but the data that those systems are using. Because if you don't manage it on a regular basis, and if you don't have a sophisticated joiners, movers, leavers process, it will be out of date the day it got updated.
Yeah.
And it's very overlooked. So I think that investment up front to really understand the landscape is critical. And of course, I think the second thing I'd say is making sure that the leadership team within the organisation is fully bought into why you're doing it and what it is you're doing. Because I've seen a lot of times in public sector where the leadership slightly changes or there's a slightly different priority, and then everything shifts, which means that maybe there's less focus on other projects. So I think that understanding the complexity and then giving it the priority that it needs to address those complexities, the key things.
I think that makes sense. And Tom, obviously we've got the citizens data. There's lots of good stuff coming down there. It feels like that doing nothing is not an option when you're looking at your own workforce.
No, I mean, as we said, more identities, having access to more things, and that complexity thing, huge focus in the last maybe 10 years with authentication, right?
Yeah.
And we've talked about wallets and different ways of logging in and proving who you are. The complexity, the really hard bit, is actually behind the front door. So in the sort of the next wave of identity, we want to do much more continuous authentication. So we continue to check you should have access to this. Context really matters. Is it 2:00 in the morning on a Sunday, or is it business hours? Are we in a security incident or not? But once you get past that authentication piece, it's the authorization. Should you have access to this resource, and whether you're a bot or a person or whatever? And actually, most businesses they don't know that. They know that you were given some access in a system 3 years ago and you've still got it. So yes, you physically can access that resource, but should you? Why should you have access to it? And I think, if you've been bitten by an RBAC project, a role-based access controls project in the past, you're probably twice shy about having another go at it because you've got 10,000 employees and you end up with 30,000 roles,
different roles,
and nobody wants to maintain them or can maintain them. And that's how you end up with your twice a year horrendous audit where they go, do you still need this role? I don't know. And if I take it away, something breaks, so you keep it.
And do you think it's that part of the year where, is that the only point where you think there's any semblance of people getting an understanding of where their identity maturity is?
People generally know where the pain points are because it's where it's frustrating and it doesn't work. Really, most of the identity stuff should disappear into the walls, right? It shouldn't be painful. User adoption of tools, particularly in the sort of privileged access space, usually is where those projects fail, right?
Yeah.
It's the people side again. The technology's there, we push it out to the people and they say, that doesn't work for me for my tool, I can't do my job, and they escalate it until they get an exception, and then you've got Swiss cheese. The controls are there, tick box. Yeah, we deployed the controls, but actually everyone just walks around.
Right, I've got to wrap things up because I've got a fishing permit to apply for. But let's talk about some takeaways. So we've cantered through citizen, we've cantered through the workforce as well. We've talked about regulation. We've talked about the opportunities of AI and the problems that also might bring by being a threat vector in itself. What are the key takeaways that we've got, Red, for a security leader within the public sector?
Yeah, so I think very much it's that the headline is that identity done well should be seen as an enabler for the citizen. And if you look in the UK, we've tried a couple of times with other systems, learnt from those, and now got one login for government. And there's the balance of trust, the balance of responsibility has evolved to a point where that feels right now. The government's kind of learnt through that experience. But it's not just the technology there, it is that holistic piece that we need to consider. So doing public identity services right involves not just the technology piece, but it does involve understanding your users, understanding the operation of that service, to the point that was just made before, making sure that it's not visible, it's not an issue. That's the moment when you know that you've done it well, and it requires all that knowledge and experience to achieve that, rather than just being a quick and easy piece of technology that you deploy.
Excellent. Faye, how about you? What do you want people to leave with?
So I would say identity is a pretty complex subject. It can be very complex to unpick. Don't underestimate it. But that doesn't mean don't do anything. It means do something before it gets worse. And actually, from an end user's perspective, keeping it as simple as possible is the answer to, I think, a lot of security challenges that lots of organisations face.
Perfect. So that leaves the golden line.
That's a great pickup.
Tom.
Thank you, Faye. I mean, we touched on this already. I think a couple of things. Doing identity well is continuous, and that's both continuous in terms of the technology continuously authenticating you and authorising you and making it very dynamic, but also in terms of the business case and actually investing in it. It's not something you want to do a big chunk every 5 years and then fall behind. So, if you need help building that business case and defining those metrics so you can show that continuous value delivered to the business and show it disappearing into the walls, but the user experience is great and the security is maintained, then please get in touch.
Fantastic. So great words to finish on. So thank you very much for a really, really interesting chat, specifically on identity in the public sector. We have got a number of other identity and focus podcasts, which I'd really encourage you to go and have a look at. We've also recorded some interesting conversations around AI, and there's a series which we'll be releasing shortly. We do, quite obviously, talk about cybersecurity and identity at some degree in those as well. So definitely worthwhile. So that just leaves me to say a huge thank you to our panel. Thank you, Richard, Red. Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Faye. If there's anything that we've covered today which piques your interest, or you've just got questions you want to ask more, I would encourage you to reach out to any of us on LinkedIn. We're happy to have a conversation and see how we can help you. So thank you very much for listening, and good luck with your identity project.